The Charles Adler Show starts now.
So in my Saturday Free Press column, Winnipeg Free Press, I called it the Brutes of Belleville. There's lots of things that you can call what happened last week when the Prime Minister was not just interfered with, some would say assaulted, if that had happened with a regular person on the streets of Belleville or anyone else. I'm positive that police could have charged them with assault, but of course it's a free country. I'm not suggesting that people be thrown in jail for exercising their freedom of expression, but that one was ugly. It was vulgar. I don't perceive it to be part of legitimate democratic dialogue, and I do perceive it as absurd for the people. I'll just call them the people who cry freedom, those people who visited him in Belleville. The idea that they don't think this is a free country, can they find me a single country that is considered a dictatorship universally? Can they find me a particle of North Korea or China or Russia or other authoritarian countries where you can get right in the face of the leader and call him a traitor, criminal, pedophile? Doesn't happen. Even though they want to declare that Canada is a dictatorship, their behavior and the lack of police response to them, every one of them is absolutely free. There's no court dates. No one's been charged. What they did proves that Canada is indeed free. Sandy Garossino is a columnist for the National Observer. She's also a former trial lawyer who I am privileged to have access to from time to time, and this is one of those special times. Sandy Garossino, welcome back to the Charles Adler Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Charles. Wonderful to be here.
Is this a free country?
Well, of course it's a free country. It's not an anarchy. It's not an anarchy.
What do you say to those people, some of whom aren't screaming the words that these people were screaming, aren't trying to get in the way of the Prime Minister's activities? It's not about the Prime Minister, it's about the people of Belleville who were expecting a certain menu of things that the Prime Minister was going to do that day, and it was interrupted and destroyed. It was chaotic. It was certainly more than just disheartening. It was alarming to the people of Belleville. I don't want to call it terrorism because I want to put terrorism in a special place, and I don't want to dilute what terrorism is. But it was terrifying to a lot of people there. So what do you say to people who aren't quite as crazed as the Brutes of Belleville, who say that this country is not as free as it once was?
When was it freer than now? I really feel like a lot of this kind of debate has gone off the rails because, of course, we know that it's so much more than just people expressing their views. They've been ginned up and hyped up by a social media environment that has spread hatred and anger and outrage for profit, and which now essentially controls virtually all of the way that most of us consume our information. That has distorted and deformed rational debate. I mean, we're now in a world where the public has a shattered sense of reality. People are getting their information from really siloed funhouse mirror rabbit holes that they're doing their own research, as they say, and that has led to I think a very harmful way that we debate rational or debate important matters of public importance. It's transformed it. I mean, there are many people who don't like the Prime Minister. I think a lot of liberals don't like the Prime Minister anymore. That's not really what this is about, and why all of us should be should be concerned. I would hope that even the most the strongest opponents of Pierre Poilievre, if he were to become prime minister, would oppose this kind of behavior and this kind of rhetoric. But I fear terribly that we're moving very swiftly beyond this point, and that rather than things coming back to normal at some point in the future, I worry terribly that with the advent of AI about to transform the way that we communicate with each other and our sources of information, I worry terribly that we are moving much more into a very fast moving river, and with a waterfall ahead. I'm very concerned about it.
So when I ask you whether we're as free as we used to be, I ask, of course, on behalf of people who keep saying that we are. I can't take my own question seriously on an intellectual level, because if anyone were to be aware, I'm a canary in the coal mine. If anyone were to be aware that we are less free, it would be me, because of the public work that I've been doing for so many years now. I've not been interfered with by any governmental authority. No government is asking for transcripts of what I do, what I say. No government is asking me to come in for interrogations, to put me under the hot lamp, to ask me why I said what I said, to tell them about my motivations, to tell them what I believe, to tell them what I don't believe. Nobody in government is trying to censor me. Nobody in government is interfering with my freedom of expression. And the fact that I've been doing this for nearly 50 years and there's not been a whiff of that, not a skiff, nothing, nada, tells me that those people who claim they're doing their own research are either lying or they're reading a bunch of lies that they choose to call research. But at some point, this big lie has got to be perforated. And I'm just wondering, Sandy Garossino, when you think about this in your private time, and we'll get into the business of social media and how social media thrives on chaos, and so do dictators, and so do people who want a dictatorship. We'll get into all of that. But I just wonder, do you think it's time for all of the political leaders, regardless of their partisanship, to hold a joint news conference or something to tell the liars that the jig is up? It is a big lie, and they don't want to put up with it. Is it time for a non-partisan approach to dealing with something that's clearly more destructive by the day?
I think absolutely it is. I mean, I'm actually shocked after Belleville that at the silence from the conservative leaders, and I say plural because Maxime Bernier, I think, would be included in this because he's done an awful lot to fan these flames. But certainly the leader of the opposition, all leaders should stand united. They don't have to have a joint press conference. That might be a little bit too they might choke on that idea, but really, this is one of the most disturbing parts of this, and we've seen south of the border the effect when political leaders are perfectly happy to just do whatever is in what they perceive to be their own personal interest of the moment, and it's. But this moment is very important in Canadian history. We really must demand that leaders, and nobody on the right is going to listen to me, but I would hope that the leaders listen to their own conscience, because they know what is involved here, and if you're not, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And this moment really calls for that. I think I don't think there could be any question about that.
If anyone on the right turns on what I'll call the far right, the Brutes of Belleville and people who support that, if anyone on the right tells them the truth about their lies, about their perniciousness, about their destructiveness, about their lack of credibility at what I'll call the great Canadian kitchen table for democratic dialogue. If someone on the right calls them out, is that group on the right afraid that these brutes will turn on them?
Well, I think look what happened with Brian Lilly in the last few days, who has been, he himself has tweeted and posted extremely inflammatory messaging for many years on social media, and he's come out to say enough is enough, and the crowds have turned on him, and now he's upset and concerned. I mean, it's a little bit, well, what did you think these matches were for, if not to light a fire? And we all know what happens with fire once it gets started. And I think it does really concern me that so many people have not thought about the consequences, the long-term consequences. It's very hard to stop all this once it gets started. At the same time, I think that Canadians, I think so many of us, I think almost everybody was shocked at this behavior, shocked at this, what seemed to be an organized campaign. But I think we also have to remember that the average person doesn't have these views. The people who are political junkies are rare, but they are getting pulled in. They are getting pulled into this debate. But my goodness, nobody should be surprised to see the hyenas turning on them.
So is Pierre Poilievre afraid of getting the same treatment that Brian Lilly of Sun Media got? Is Brian Lilly, sort of a canary for the coal mine that Poilievre is paying attention to? Does Poilievre worry that if he calls out what happened in Belleville, that great masses of people on the far right, certainly on social media, will go after him the way they go after the Prime Minister?
I think he's afraid that Maxime Bernier will go after him. He's afraid that if he does anything that is not mollycoddling this bunch, and it started with the donuts in Ottawa at the convoy. Well, it didn't start there. There'd been a lot of dog whistles long before then. But the overt pandering was very clear when the convoy came to town. I mean, it was very shocking how the Conservative Party behaved, but it was clear at that point that they had decided, they had made a strategic choice to pursue the Maxime Bernier People's Party of Canada audience. That was where they thought that their bread was buttered, was to pander to the right. And I think they are now they've boxed themselves in, because they've gone so far that they can't really move back to the center very easily. They can't criticize or make a strong, I'm talking politically, all of these things are entirely possible, but politically, they've got in bed with this bunch, and this is not a rational bunch, and they will turn on, they will bite the hand that feeds them on a moment's notice. They will do that in a heartbeat, and he knows that full well, and he knows that Maxime Bernier is licking his chops at the far end of the right, knowing that these voters will flow to him and destroy any chance that the Conservatives have for forming government.
So help me with the math on this. Help me with the math on this, Sandy Garossino. You're living in a part of the world that is absolutely critical. If Poilievre is hoping to form government, you're in the Vancouver area. In the Vancouver area in general, I'm not talking about downtown Vancouver, but certainly the Vancouver suburbs. They are battlegrounds where Conservatives have done very well in the past. They want to do well in the future, and they have to if they want to form government. It's much like the ring around Toronto, although Toronto is much greater population, but nevertheless, the suburbs of Toronto are critical, as are the suburbs of Vancouver. In none of those places does Maxime Bernier do well. The competition isn't Maxime Bernier, it's the NDP and the Liberals. Why is Poilievre so worried about a party that only does relatively well in the parts of Canada that the Conservatives have no problem winning?
Well, that's kind of the mystery, don't you think, Charles? I mean, this is what I don't understand. If you look strategically, the swing zones, I mean, the 905, the Metro Toronto area is the huge prize. And Quebec is important. Not so much that the Conservatives could take Quebec, but can they prevent the Liberals from gaining or holding seats in Quebec? And then Metro Vancouver is another swing region, not nearly as significant as the others. But I mean, let's look at it. I mean, it's the swing voters that decide elections. And the swing voters are not Maxime Bernier voters. No. And this has been a remarkable, what I think, miscalculation on the part of Poilievre, because I think it can do long-term damage to the Conservative Party. And we've seen the results in the by-elections, haven't we? We've seen the results of what happens even in areas that are pretty blue friendly, pretty friendly to the Conservatives. That in the last round of by-elections, the Conservatives, contrary to how the polls had been going, the Conservatives actually lost significant votes in those more moderate ridings. So the Conservatives formed government, and I've looked at elections going back 50 years and more. The Conservatives formed the government when the Liberals collapse and the NDP gain a really strong foothold and make a big play. That's how Stephen Harper got his majority, was that by the complete collapse of the Ignatieff Liberal Party and the meteoric and astonishing rise of Jack Layton. And absent a major move between the NDP and the Liberals, the Conservatives don't really gain in those critical voter-rich areas where the swing voters are. The swing voters are not in Calgary. The swing voters are not in Atlantic Canada. The swing voters are in Toronto. Different swing voters, not between Conservatives and Liberals, but between the Bloc and the Liberals in Quebec, and swing voters in Metro Vancouver. That's where the election is decided.
But in general, Quebec notwithstanding, in general, swing voters are people who bounce in general between the Liberals and the Conservatives, not between the Liberals and the People's Party of Maxime Bernier. Let me get back to the Brian Lilley column. I read the column that triggered the response that frightened Lilley. This was where Lilley was commenting on what I call the Brutes of Belleville. But in that column, was it not clear to you, Sandy, that the panic button that Lilley was pushing wasn't about how these brutes had visited this pristine part of Canada called Belleville and created the chaos? I don't think that's really what got Brian Lilley to write that column. I think that what got Lilley to write it is he felt that there would be an outrage that would create a wave that would wash over his beloved Conservative Party of Canada, that these brutes were making the Conservatives look bad, and that this was a good day for Trudeau politically. Well, what are your thoughts on what Lilley and others are saying?
Well, he made that really clear. He made that really clear, didn't he? It was that, oh, well, this is going to backfire. Don't do this, not because it's wrong. Don't do this. Don't behave in this way. Not because this is morally reprehensible and offensive to all right-thinking Canadians everywhere. Don't do this because it's going to hurt our party, or the Conservatives, which is, that's not, I mean, there's a lot of things to say about this, but basically, it's not in our interests. You're hurting us, and that's the rationale. So yeah, I mean, he pretty much told on himself, I thought, in how he's addressed this. Was, well, this isn't going to help us. Welcome to civilization.
Well, for me, that's what took the moral authority, just sucked it right out of the column when your central organizing principle is a complaint that this is not in your partisan interest. It's
Yeah.
hard on a moral / ethical level to take the word seriously.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was very mealy mouthed, and I think it was. But I think it also. But the fact that he did it at all, I think, also revealed a disquiet, wouldn't you say, in conservative ranks that this fire is starting to burn out of control.
I do think that many conservatives, certainly people I talk to, I mean, most of my personal friends happen to be conservative, and their central complaint is that Canada is not as dark as the conservatives paint it, and if they want to portray Canada as this dark and desperate jungle, they're going to lose a lot of people who simply don't identify with that. I'm not saying that we're having the best of times. I'm not saying that inflation isn't an issue. I'm not saying that crime isn't an issue. But the idea that we've become this, this backwater, this swampy, ugly place where people don't want to live and children don't smile, it's just kind of silly. It's become this dark HBO movie. That's a movie, but it's not reality. The thing is that many conservative supporters that I talk to would love to hear some kind of positive vision enunciated. Many of them are sick and tired of hearing nothing but Trudeau, 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 Trudeau. It's beyond the morality of it or lack of morality. It's just phony. It's a phony way to try to become the government in waiting.
Well, and yes, because it's so much, it's all about, what is the viral message of the day? And of course, inflation has now fallen to below 3%. So it's starting to approach the zone. By the way, that doesn't mean that prices have fallen. So people are still paying and really feeling the bite of those increased prices. And so we have to be mindful of that. But inflation we've stopped the galloping runaway inflation. Remember when Polyev took over the leadership, it was inflation and the vaccine mandates. These were the things. Well, now what are they going to do? And this is the problem with having your policies being yanked by the message of the day. And a lot of those messages come, by the way, from the United States. I mean, there's so much of this messaging that is just coming straight out of the U.S. and the U.S. This rapacious, again, I come back to social media, but the rapacious volume of really panicky kind of messaging that the Trump campaign. And, what's remarkable about this is that we all know that even in the United States, the Republican Party and all of these people who are carrying on like baboons in the Republican Party right now, what's now well known is that when the cameras are off and the media has gone home, they all are wiping the sweat from their brows and wondering when will this nightmare end, that they can stop behaving like complete jackasses just to whip people up to please one guy. So, I mean, even our whole country, I feel like our whole country's political dialogue is being driven very much by what's happening south of the border with the Donald Trump campaign.
So we're doing a podcast now, and I can't help but notice when I look at which podcasts are being paid attention to in Canada, most of the podcasts that people pay attention to are American. So as you know, I'm in no position based on my life and based on my career to be anti-American, and I'm not. But I just wonder if most Canadians, just regular Canadians, are listening to American podcasts. I'm not saying that we're not getting our due, and I'm very grateful to the many Canadians who are listening and watching this right now. So I'm not trying to portray myself as someone who's lacking in gratitude to my fellow Canadians. But it seems that most Canadian hours are spent listening to American podcasts, and certainly it's obvious from conservative headquarters that they pay much more attention to right of center politics in the United States than they do to anything else, including anything else that's going on in this country. So I just wonder whether this is a trend that could be turned around. I mean, there are many more podcasting hours available. There's a much more U.S. product available than Canadian product, and clearly some Canadian product isn't really connecting, or let's just put it bluntly, is boring many Canadian minds. Ideas don't really have borders. It's clear that the showbiz in U.S. politics is appealing to a lot of Canadians. So is there any reason to believe, Sandy, that this trend will stop, this idea of just aping whatever the American right is doing?
Well, that gets back to something that I continue to push, which is the influence of social media, because all of these things, everything nowadays in the media world is built on and relies on the major social media giants, in particular Google, YouTube. YouTube is owned by Google, and Facebook, Meta, and those platforms drive a huge amount of the sharing. And once you start to peel away the layers of, well, how does that work, and how does that operate, and what is the impact? One of the things that we know about social media, and you can get this information from Tristan Harris of who is a really important thinker in this area. And he is pointing out that disinformation and fake news spreads at 6 times the rate of true content, of true news on the internet. And extremism, because extreme views and fake news and disinformation are so viral, that means that they're very rich content for anybody who produces them. It's money making. You can actually make money off this. Now Twitter's going to be supposedly paying content creators. YouTube is paying content creators. And all of this, there's money in it. And extremism is the way to go. That's how you make the money. So we're going to be getting that content. And this is one of the things that, I mean, even people who are very close watchers of the media environment are noting how this addiction to extremist content, just because it travels so well, it is completely overrepresented in the media environment. So it distorts the picture that the average citizen and average consumer of news and of media, it completely distorts their perception of how common those views are. Those views are very uncommon. They are extreme views. They are not commonly held. The average person on the street does not think like Jordan Peterson. The average guy at the football game or the baseball game is not thinking like Ben Shapiro, but people are consuming that because it's a moneymaker. It's a moneymaker for Facebook and for Google, for all of these engines, and it's a moneymaker for these content creators. There was an interesting statistic, by the way, just to go down this a little bit more, because I was reading a little bit about this last night, and Tristan Harris was pointing out that Alex Jones, you know, the guy that was spreading all those vicious stories about the school shooting and the parents of the children involved, saying that these were all crisis actors and that this had never happened. His content was shared on Facebook and YouTube something like 15 billion times, more than almost all other content combined. Why this attracts eyeballs, God only knows. But it's a huge a vast money-making machine, and it's a secret money-making machine because most of the average person doesn't really consume that. But there's a huge number of people who consume only that, and it's actually dangerous. Is one of the things that, you know, we can talk about the impact on social discourse, the impact on politics, but I think we have to start calling this out as actually dangerous. What we saw at Belleville, no bones about it, that was a dangerous situation, and I don't actually want to see the Prime Minister of Canada of any party, representing any party, to ever face that kind of thing in such close quarters again. That's just not acceptable, and something terrible is going to happen. We have all kind of minimized when the guy broke through the gates at was at Rideau Hall, where the Prime Minister's family was staying, and I was quite surprised when I was reading into the stories about the reports on the RCMP coming out of the Nova Scotia shooting, that guy who was armed was in an actual standoff with police for 90 minutes. That never was something that was reported very much. It was like, oh, this guy broke through the gates, and then it was treated like, oh, he was wandering around the grounds. No, this was an actual standoff, as I understand the news reports, the reports that were made. So something terrible is going to happen, and I think we have to start waking up to the danger, not only to political leaders, but to citizens who might want to go out and meet the Prime Minister of Canada, to see the Prime Minister of Canada, be at a pancake, be at the Calgary Stampede. Maybe they want to see Danielle Smith, and we're in a dangerous zone, and unstable people are being whipped up by this. And I think that the debate should turn very far away from, oh, our freedoms are not, we don't enjoy the same freedoms that we used to have. I think we have to start being a lot more concerned about the danger to political leaders and to citizens and families that want to go out and meet those political leaders.
Sandy, I'm going to do something very rare here. I'll do a little bit of a preamble before I ask a question so that you can have a glass of water, because all of us who are involved in the podcasting game sometimes have to, lubricate our throats, because it's just a function, an occupational hazard, as it were. But the business about it being dangerous, do you see what happened in Belleville, which was a swarming of the Prime Minister? Do you see it as a metaphor for what's happening with our country, with our democracy? Are we being swarmed by people, and I'll just use the generous term radical? Are we being swarmed by radicals, and are we as a people, just because of the nature of Canadians who don't want to take sometimes issues that are very, very serious, don't want to take it seriously because we've got that sort of natural Canadian approach? Well, no, it's not as bad as the States. It's not as bad as parts of Europe, other parts of the world. After all, this is Canada. Aren't we in denial that we are being swarmed by goons and by brutes?
Well, I see this a little bit differently. Excuse me, I am going to clear my throat. I see this a little bit differently, Charles. I mean, that's how I would have seen this before, but I think what we have to realize is that a lot of these people 5 years ago or 10 years ago bore no resemblance to the behavior that we're seeing them display on national television. And by the way, the fact that it's on national television and being spread virally throughout the internet has an awful lot to do with why they're doing it, because they know the cameras are a brilliant way to get their messages through. You want to be an anti-vaxxer? Go stop an ambulance at a children's hospital. This is the way to get attention, and we are all addicted to it. In some ways, I feel like these people are the canaries in the coal mine, because these people have been radicalized by fake news and disinformation. The very idea of calling the Prime Minister of Canada a pedophile, the absurdity of it, but they know it will get attention. And the very fact of it getting attention means that it gets spread much further. Far more people in Canada have heard that the Prime Minister is a pedophile than would ever be imaginable. And the fact that everybody's going, well, everybody we know is going, well, of course he's not a pedophile. This is ridiculous. These people are goons. These are baboons. That's not what's really going on. The disinformation is going in this way, and these people have been sucked into a vortex of disinformation themselves, and they've been trained to do that by a business model that benefits from their addiction to disinformation and to lies.
So he was called a pedophile and a criminal and a puke,
and by the way, a Jew. Which is not an insult, but
the Jew part is in debate because some people heard Jew and some people heard puke. But in any case, that's how this thing is playing out. Some people hear the P at the beginning of that particular cat call, and so they're saying no, she was calling him a puke. But regardless, he's being called all of these names, all these epithets are being used on the Prime Minister. The words that are absolutely clear are traitor, criminal, and pedophile. Here's the question: does this simply lead? Because the words have no what I would call intellectual foundation. There's no evidence here. As in court, you spent a lot of time as a trial lawyer, and the judge will say, do you have a foundation for this assertion? Do you have any kind of evidence for what you're saying? And if you don't, then you shouldn't be saying it. But this isn't the law courts. This is the court of public opinion. Are we going to be at a stage of our own debasement in this country, where I'm not just talking about 7-year-olds, but I'm talking about just people in general? Are they going to be calling other people all these names? Is that the kind of country that we're devolving into, where even words like criminal and traitor and pedophile are just words that people will be using on each other?
Well, I think we've kind of, I don't know whether, I don't know whether people will do this in real life, but it is, for many of us who've been watching this for a long time. I mean, I've been watching this over 10 years, 11 years now is when I started to see what appeared to be a really disturbing trend line in social media. And at first, for a long time, it was restricted to social media. And I continue to be kind of heartened by the fact that when I go to the grocery store, or when the plumber comes to work on my house, like, nobody's calling anybody a pedophile. These things don't happen. We see absolutely ridiculous behavior, that gets picked up and filmed and then spreads virally online, of just disgraceful conduct. But I think almost none of us see this in our daily lives, or would ever see this. But it is starting to break through. It used to be just online. And then there was, I don't know how many people will remember something called Gamergate, when there was an active, organized and orchestrated swarming of women online who were objecting to certain things in video games. That seemed to be the beginnings. Those people who were involved in that were then recruited by the Trump allies, by Steve Bannon and the Trump people, Mike Flynn and others, to use exactly the same techniques in the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton. And that kind of started an awful lot of this. The politicization of it is the injection of politics into this kind of really vile conduct online. And a lot of people at the time were really worried that they would get personally attacked. I personally have been doxxed, and my first reaction when it happened was to like run to make sure that my drapes were all closed and my doors were locked, and I was really terrified. And for about 48 hours, there was a big blow up online within a very narrow community of particular activists. And then it all disappeared. So there was a feeling, and I think that we have generally kind of become complacent about this, that, well, this stuff just happens online and it actually doesn't matter. And these threats don't mean anything and you don't really need to worry. But I think it's become much more serious than that, and it has started to punch through and break through. And I keep coming back to the Prime Minister's residence being attacked. Is it going to affect like the average person? The average person, are we going to see this behavior? I don't think so, but we're starting to see more, like at school board hearings. I don't know if that started very much in Canada. There might be people who are listening who can say if there's, but I think we're going to start to hear it in public forums, and then it could very easily grow. But I think the biggest thing is that I don't think there is a self-correcting mechanism here. And we are about to see AI start to take over. And remember, profit is what made this all go viral. Profit is what created the algorithms that spreads all of this. And profit is what's driving AI. And this is going to be vastly beyond our ability to address or even regulate. And one of the things that is so important, in my view, is for us to stop with this talk about freedom of speech. That's not and has never been what this is about. That is bait, and it has been used especially by the right, to enable them to say just about anything to anybody.
When you talk about AI, artificial intelligence, making this a lot worse, are you talking about social media accounts that are governed by artificial intelligence, that it's not real human beings sending stuff out? It's essentially artificial intelligence robots that are going to be sending out the messages, because we've got some of that right now without artificial intelligence, just with the amount of bots that are littering Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, Facebook and other social media platforms. Give us the specifics, Sandy Garossino, on artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence will operate in the social media ecosystem.
Well, and I am not an AI expert in any sense of the word, but it's not just going to be that bots are there. What's deceptive about all of our experience of content that we see online, and most of us are getting most of our information online now, and the platforms, not just the platforms, but our phones. We talked about this last week, Charles, the addiction, loneliness, the doom scrolling, the fact that hours and hours are disappearing from our daily lives all the time because of our addiction. All of that's not just coincidence, and it's not just the fact that, well, we don't have quite, we should get off social media, or we should get off these things, but we're just going to go a little bit longer. This is actually programmed in. These algorithms and the platforms are designed to keep your attention, because the longer they keep your attention, the more ads they can show you. And the more ads they can show you, the more revenue they make. And Google and Facebook, between the two of them, are making $400 billion a year, every year. $400 billion between those two companies in revenues. Almost all of that is ad revenue. Now, that's not just by chance that they're getting that. It's not just by chance that these two companies, and only these two companies, completely dominate the advertising revenue markets. But there's a web of contracts and relationships that they have with other platforms. Apple has a platform with Google that Google is going to be the default search engine for on Apple devices. There are all kinds of these agreements and contracts and relationships are happening behind the scenes that that the average one of us never sees any part of. But there's also the programming, the algorithms, the colors that are used, our desire to retweet and to share, the fact that we are motivated to share and we are rewarded by sharing with likes and thumbs ups and all of this kind of thing. This has become a reward, and this is actually based on neuroscience. This is not, oh, people will like this. There's a huge amount of neuroscience that has gone into manipulating human behavior to increase our addiction and the attention that we give to all our devices. I said it last week, I'll say it again. Anybody who's watching this or listening to this on their mobile, if you're in a coffee shop or wherever you are, look around you and look at the degree to which everybody is on their phones. This isn't just a whole bunch of people who don't have any self-control. They have been gamed by a neurological system. Now we are about to have, and by the way, AI, that was our first contact with AI. That was, as Tristan Harris says, that was our first exposure to the impact of AI when they used algorithms and used finely tuned data to find ways to make us stay on these platforms longer and to give them our undivided attention. And there's an arms race between all of these platforms: TikTok, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter. All of them are in a race for our attention and to hold and keep our attention, because the longer that we're on there and the more that we share, the more that this drives revenues to them. Well, now real AI, much, much more sophisticated, is about to take over this. And we are being neurologically programmed for addiction, and that is driving terrible impacts especially for young people, our children who cannot get themselves offline. There you can see the blue light from their phones from under the doorway at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is all programmed in, and nobody is controlling it, and almost none of us understand the extent of it, and there's no transparency about it. But this is why all of these messages, the idea of calling the Prime Minister a pedophile, this is a ludicrous idea, and yet almost every Canadian has heard it. So this is the result of AI, and we're going to be seeing more of it, not less. And it's very troubling, and it's incumbent on all our political leaders to begin to address this, not just the offensiveness of this conduct, but controlling and regulating the platforms that are making money by by radicalizing us.
Sandy Garossino, there's something about what you say and how you say it and the experience that you bring to every single segment that we do. We're very privileged to have you in this country. We're certainly privileged to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
National Observer columnist, essayist, former trial lawyer Sandy Garossino in Vancouver. Can't thank you enough for joining us, and I can't thank you enough. I'm so grateful for you passing on the word to everyone in your life about the Charles Adler Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Catch Charles Adler Mondays on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson, twice a week in the Winnipeg Free Press, and every day at criermedia.co.